The neon glow of the city pulsed like a dying heartbeat, casting long shadows over crumbling alleys where survival meant sacrifice. In a dimly lit marketplace teeming with desperate souls, an alien mother stood before a human buyer, her violet skin dulled by exhaustion, her large, luminous eyes betraying the weight of her decision. She had no name to offer, only a body and a plea. Her child was starving, their world ravaged by war and famine. The interstellar markets thrived on desperation, and she knew that selling herself as a servant was the only way to secure enough credits to feed her offspring for another month. The human buyer, dressed in a sleek corporate uniform, studied her with calculating interest. He had seen countless aliens reduced to commodities, stripped of dignity in exchange for survival. Yet something about this one unsettled him. Her posture was not that of a slave resigned to fate, but of a warrior who had fought every step to reach this moment. She did not beg. She offered herself with quiet resolve. He named his price, expecting haggling, but she accepted without hesitation. The deal was struck. As they left the market, the child clung to her side, small and trembling, its wide eyes reflecting both fear and hope. The journey to the buyer's home was silent, the weight of unspoken thoughts pressing between them. She had sold herself for love, for survival, for a future uncertain yet fiercely desired. But what neither of them knew was that this transaction would lead to something neither had anticipated. The house was cold, metallic, filled with a hum of machines that replaced warmth. No windows opened to the sky. No plants grew in corners. No soft fabrics softened surfaces. It was efficient, sterile, untouched by life beyond the man who lived there alone. He showed her the quarters assigned to her, small, functional, barely more than a place to sleep. She nodded, setting down the few belongings she carried, her hand steady despite the tremor in her chest. He handed her a tablet with instructions, tasks to complete each day. She read through them carefully, committing them to memory. There was no room for error. Every credit she earned here was food in her child's mouth, shelter over their heads. She had made this choice knowing it would be hard, but she had never imagined how lonely it would feel. At night, after the work was done, she sat beside the child, holding them close as they drifted to sleep. They whispered stories of their homeworld, of oceans that shimmered under twin suns, of skies painted in colors unknown to Earth. The child listened, eyes heavy, fingers curled around her wrist as if afraid she might vanish. She kissed their forehead and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. She woke before dawn the next morning, moving through the house in silence. She cleaned, cooked, maintained the systems that kept the house running. She observed everything. The patterns of the man who owned her contract, the way he moved, the way he spoke to others through holographic calls. He was not cruel, not kind either. He was distant, watching her like a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve. By the end of the first week, she had memorized the layout of the house, the routines of its occupant, the precise way he liked his tea in the mornings. She performed her duties without complaint, without hesitation. And still, something lingered in his gaze when he looked at her. Not suspicion, not ownership, but curiosity. One evening, as she prepared dinner, he entered the kitchen, leaning against the counter instead of retreating to his office as he usually did. She continued chopping vegetables, waiting for him to speak. "You didn't argue the price," he said finally. She paused. There was no point. "You could have asked for more." "I could have," she agreed, placing the knife down. "But I needed the credits now, not later. My child has already gone too long without proper food." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not like the others." She met his gaze. "No, I'm not." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Why did you do it?" She turned away, returning to her task. "Because I had to." "But why not steal? Why not run? Stealing gets you killed. Running gets you caught." She glanced at him briefly. This was the safest path. He was quiet for a while before nodding once and leaving the room. She watched him go, unsure what to make of the conversation. He was trying to understand her, perhaps even questioning his own role in all of this. But understanding wouldn't change the reality of her position. She was still bound by contract, still expected to serve until the debt was paid. Still, something had shifted. Over the following days, he began speaking to her more often, asking questions about her world, her people, her past. She answered carefully, revealing just enough to satisfy his curiosity without exposing too much of herself. She had learned long ago that trust was dangerous, that vulnerability invited weakness. Yet, despite her caution, she found herself listening when he spoke. He told her about his childhood, about the expectations placed upon him, the loneliness that came with wealth. She didn't respond with sympathy. She couldn't afford to, but she heard him, and that in itself was something new. The child, too, began adjusting. They explored the house cautiously, touching objects with curious fingers, mimicking the sounds of the AI assistant that guided daily operations. At night, they no longer cried themselves to sleep. Instead, they watched the stars through the artificial window panels, whispering dreams of returning home one day. Home. She rarely allowed herself to think of it. Too many memories lay buried beneath the surface, of family lost, of cities burned, of skies choked with ash. Their escape had been desperate, their survival uncertain. Selling herself had been the only option left. And yet, as the days passed, she felt the edges of her resolve begin to soften, not because she trusted him fully, but because she saw something in him that she hadn't expected. Hesitation, doubt, a flicker of humanity struggling to break through the walls of privilege. Still, she reminded herself that contracts were binding, that freedom was not hers to claim, that love, real love, was not something given freely in places like this. It was bought, and she had already paid the price. The alien mother adjusted quickly to the rhythm of the house, though the silence that filled its halls was heavier than any she had known. Every morning, she rose before the artificial sun simulated dawn, moving through the tasks assigned to her with quiet precision. Cleaning, maintenance, meal preparation. Each duty followed a strict order dictated by the household's AI system. There was no room for deviation, no space for hesitation. She performed them without complaint, knowing that efficiency was expected and mistakes could be costly. Yet, despite her diligence, something in the human unsettled her. He did not treat her like the others had. No harsh commands, no cold indifference. Instead, he watched her, not with suspicion, but with something quieter, curiosity, perhaps even discomfort. It made her uneasy. She had learned long ago that kindness from those in power was often a trap, a mask for something more insidious. And yet, when he spoke to her, it was never with cruelty. When he passed her in the hallway, his gaze lingered longer than necessary, as if trying to decipher something beyond words. The child, too, noticed the difference. At first, they remained cautious, trailing behind her with wide eyes, flinching at every unfamiliar sound. But slowly, they began to explore. The house was unlike anything they had ever known. Sterile, ordered, untouched by the chaos of their past lives. They touched the smooth metal surfaces, tested the weight of books on shelves, listened to the soft hum of machines that replaced warmth. One evening, as she prepared dinner, the child wandered into the living area where the human sat reading. She tensed instinctively, expecting him to send them away, to remind her that servants were meant to stay unseen. But instead, he looked up, watching the child as they reached out to touch the edge of a framed photograph on the table. He did not stop them. She hesitated in the doorway, uncertain whether to intervene. Then, after a moment, he leaned forward slightly. "That's my father," he said quietly. The child blinked, tilting their head. "Is he still alive?" A pause, then a slow shake of his head. "No." The alien mother exhaled, stepping forward. "Come here," she murmured gently. The child obeyed, retreating to her side without protest. Later that night, as she tucked him into bed, they whispered. He didn't yell. "No," she agreed softly. He didn't. And that, more than anything, unsettled her the most. Over time, their interactions grew more frequent. He asked questions, not just about her duties, but about her world, her people, the stories she told the child at night. She answered carefully, revealing only fragments, enough to satisfy his curiosity without exposing too much of herself. She had learned that trust was dangerous, That vulnerability invited weakness. But still, something shifted between them. He began speaking more openly, sharing pieces of his own life. He spoke of growing up in a world of privilege, surrounded by wealth but starved of connection, of expectations placed upon him, of choices made not for happiness but for obligation. He did not ask for sympathy, but she heard him, and that in itself was something new. One night, as she cleaned the dining room after he had finished his meal, he surprised her by remaining seated rather than retreating to his study. She worked around him in silence, careful not to intrude, until he finally spoke. "You don't have to do that tonight," he said. She paused mid-motion. "I do. Not right now." His voice was softer than usual, lacking its usual detachment. "Sit." She hesitated, glancing toward the hallway as if expecting someone else to appear, some invisible force to remind her of her place. But there was no one, just him. Slowly, she lowered herself onto the chair across from him, hands folded neatly in her lap. He studied her for a long moment before exhaling. "I've seen hundreds like you," he admitted. "Aliens sold into servitude, stripped of everything except what's necessary to survive. Most of them accept it. Some fight it. But you," he shook his head, "you're different." She did not respond immediately. Instead, she met his gaze, searching for the hidden meaning beneath his words. "Because I chose this. Because you didn't break." A flicker of something passed through her chest, something dangerously close to pride. But she buried it quickly. Breaking doesn't feed a child. He nodded once, then looked away. Silence stretched between them, thick and unspoken. Then, after a while, he pushed back from the table and stood. "Good night," he said simply. She watched him go, fingers tightening around the cloth in her hand. Something had changed. Not drastically, not all at once, but enough for her to notice, enough for her to wonder. As the days passed, the walls between them continued to erode. He stopped issuing orders outright, instead phrasing requests as questions. She responded not with obedience, but with consideration. Their conversations grew longer, slipping into topics neither had expected to discuss. Memories of home, the weight of responsibility, the fear of failure. She found herself listening when he spoke, absorbing the nuances of his voice, the way his posture shifted when he was thoughtful versus defensive. And he, in turn, began to see her not as a servant, but as a person, one who had endured, who had fought, who had chosen sacrifice over surrender. Still, she reminded herself that contracts were binding, that freedom was not hers to claim, that love, real love, was not something given freely in places like this. It was bought, and she had already paid the price. One evening, as the artificial lights dimmed to mimic the soft glow of dusk, the human sat across from her at the dining table, watching as she carefully portioned food for the child. The silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. Then he exhaled slowly and placed a datapad on the table between them. "You're free," he said simply. Her hands stilled, her violet fingers hovering above the utensils. "What?" He pushed the pad toward her. "I voided your contract. You don't owe me anything anymore." She stared at the screen, scanning the legal document that officially severed her status as property. It was real, legally binding. She could leave. She could take her child and disappear into the city beyond the reach of debt and obligation. But instead of relief, confusion twisted within her. "Why?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. His gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "Because I can't pretend this is right. I bought you because I thought I understood how the world worked. That survival means making deals. That power belongs to those who can afford it. But you gave yourself up for someone else. Not because you wanted to, but because you had no other choice. And I realized that if I let you stay, I'd be no different from everyone else who takes advantage of desperation." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "And what if we have nowhere else to go?" "Then stay," he said, "not as a servant, as equals." The words settled between them, heavier than any contract ever could. For the first time since arriving, she was not being told what to do. She was being given a choice. The child looked up from their meal, sensing the tension in the air. Their small fingers curled around her wrist, seeking reassurance. She glanced down at them, then back at the human whose world had become theirs, however briefly. For so long, she had believed that survival required sacrifice. That love meant giving everything away. But now, here was someone offered her something she had never expected: freedom. And with it, the terrifying possibility of something more. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she reached for the datapad, fingers tracing the edge of the screen. This was not how things worked. Contracts were signed, debts were paid, and people like her did not get second chances. And yet, here it was, a chance to walk away, to reclaim her life without strings attached. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. When she opened them again, she met his gaze. "I won't run," she said quietly. "Not tonight, not tomorrow. But I need to understand why you would do this." He leaned back slightly, as if considering how much to say. Then, after a pause, he answered, "Because I saw myself in you. Not the part of me that built this life, but the part that was always afraid of losing it. You didn't come here looking for comfort. You came here because you had nothing left to lose. And when I realized that, I couldn't keep pretending I was doing the right thing by keeping you here." A strange warmth stirred in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but something close to recognition. He wasn't just letting her go. He was acknowledging the weight of what she had done, the depth of what she had sacrificed. Still, the uncertainty remained. Freedom was not just a word. It was a responsibility, a burden. What would they do now? Where would they go? The child shifted beside her, yawning sleepily. They had grown used to this place, to the routine, to the quiet presence of the man who had once been only a buyer, but now seemed something else entirely. She exhaled slowly. "If I stay," she said carefully, "it will not be because I am bound by contract. It will be because I choose to." His lips parted slightly, as if surprised by her words. Then he nodded once. "That's all I want." And just like that, the balance of power shifted. No longer master and servant, no longer owner and possession. Two people, standing at the edge of something neither had anticipated. Later that night, after the child had fallen asleep, she found herself lingering near the window, staring out at the artificial skyline. The city pulsed with neon, alive with movement, filled with people who lived and died by contracts like hers. Behind her, the human stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely over his chest. He didn't speak at first, simply watched her. "You really don't have to stay," he said finally. She turned to face him. "And you really don't have to give me a choice." He hesitated, then stepped forward. "Maybe I needed to prove something to myself." "What?" "That I'm not just another person who takes what they want without thinking about the cost." She studied him for a long moment, searching his expression for deception, for hidden motives. But there was none, only sincerity, laced with something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. Finally, she said, "You don't owe me anything." "No," he agreed, "but maybe I owe myself something better." She let the words settle between them before turning back to the window. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the choices made within these walls. But inside, something had changed. For the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar. Hope, not the reckless kind, the kind that led to disappointment and heartbreak, but the quiet, cautious kind, the kind that whispered that maybe, just maybe, the future could be something more than survival. She looked at him one last time before speaking. "I'll stay, but not because I have to, because I want to see what happens next." A slow smile touched his lips. "Then let's find out together." And as they stood side by side, watching the city pulse with life beyond the glass, neither of them spoke the words aloud. But they both knew something had begun, and it had nothing to do with contracts, everything to do with choice. The days that followed were unlike anything either of them had anticipated. Without the constraints of servitude, the alien mother found herself hesitating at every turn, uncertain of how to navigate a life where choices were hers to make. The human, too, struggled with a sudden shift in dynamics. No longer employer and employee, they now existed in an undefined space, one where neither knew how to proceed, yet both felt compelled to try. Slowly, routines changed. Instead of waking before dawn to complete assigned tasks, she rose at her own pace, preparing meals not out of obligation, but because she wanted to share them. The child, once reserved and watchful, began to explore the house freely, trailing after the human with curious eyes. He, in turn, stopped retreating into silence. He laughed more, engaged more, and for the first time in years, the house felt less like a machine and more like a home. Yet, the transition was not without its struggles. There were moments of uncertainty, times when the alien mother caught herself slipping back into old habits, anticipating orders that no longer came. The human, too, wrestled with guilt, questioning whether his actions had truly been selfless or if he had merely convinced himself of righteousness to ease the discomfort of his privilege. Trust was fragile, built not through grand gestures but through patience, understanding, and the willingness to stumble forward together. It was in these quiet moments, the shared glances, the hesitant smiles, the whispered conversations late into the night, that something deeper took root. Love, unexpected and unspoken, wove itself into the fabric of their lives. Not the kind born of passion or fleeting desire, but the kind forged through hardship, sacrifice, and the simple act of choosing each other when the world had taught them to expect otherwise. One evening, as they sat on a balcony overlooking the artificial skyline, the child curled between them. The human finally voiced what had lingered unspoken for days. "You could leave," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" She looked at him, her violet eyes reflecting the distant neon glow. "And go where?" "Anywhere." She exhaled slowly, brushing a stray lock of hair from the child's forehead. "I have nowhere else." "You do," he corrected gently. "You just haven't decided to take it yet." She considered this, then shook her head slightly. "This place is unfamiliar, but it is not unsafe." He studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Then stay." She did not answer immediately. Instead, she let the city hum around them, the rhythm of life beyond their walls reminding her that freedom was not just about leaving. It was about choosing where to remain. Over the following weeks, small changes accumulated into something undeniable. The child no longer flinched at sudden movements, no longer asked when they would be moving again. They had begun calling the human by name instead of watching him with wary distance. And he, in turn, had started setting aside time each day to sit with them, reading stories, answering questions, allowing himself to be more than just a benefactor. For the alien mother, the shift was subtler. She no longer moved to the house like a ghost, careful not to disrupt the order of things. She left belongings in places she once would have hidden. She spoke her thoughts instead of keeping them locked away. And when the human looked at her now, there was no trace of ownership, only curiosity, admiration, and something dangerously close to affection. One morning, as she prepared breakfast, he entered the kitchen and leaned against the counter beside her. "We should talk about the future," he said. She glanced at him briefly before continuing her task. "I assumed you already had plans." "I do," he admitted, "but I want to know what yours look like." She paused, setting down the utensil in her hand. "I don't know what you mean." He turned to face her fully. "You're free now. You can go anywhere. Do anything. What do you want?" She frowned slightly, considering. "To keep my child safe. To find a place where we are not constantly running, where we belong." His expression softened. "What if I told you I wanted the same thing?" She met his gaze, searching for deception, but found none. "You could have anyone. Anything. Why would you choose this?" "Because you didn't ask for anything," he said simply. "You gave everything, and still you never lost yourself. That means something." She swallowed, looking away. "I don't know how to be anything else." "You don't have to figure out alone," he said. "Not anymore." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft hum of the city outside. Then she nodded once. "Tell me your plan." He smiled faintly. "There's a colony off-world, a new settlement. It's far from here, but it's peaceful. No markets, no contracts, just people trying to build something better." She absorbed his words carefully. "And us, if you want it," he said, voice steady. We go together. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the possibilities settle within her. For so long, survival had meant sacrifice. Now, for the first time, it meant choice. When she opened her eyes again, she reached for his hand, not in submission, but in agreement. Then we go. And just like that, the path ahead became something more than mere escape. It became a beginning. As the days passed, preparations unfolded with quiet determination. The human arranged for passage, secured necessary documents, ensured that no remnants of the past could reach them. The alien mother packed carefully, selecting only what was needed, leaving behind a burden she no longer wished to carry. On the eve of their departure, she stood in the hallway, staring at the door that had once marked the boundary of her existence. It no longer held the same meaning. It was not a prison anymore, nor a refuge. It was simply a place they had passed through together. Behind her, the human approached, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Ready?" he asked. She turned to him, taking in the man who had once been her buyer, then her employer, then something more. Now, he was simply someone who had chosen to stand beside her when the world had given him every reason not to. She nodded. Yes. Together, they stepped forward, leaving behind the echoes of what once was, walking toward the unknown with nothing but trust in each other. And as the ship lifted into the sky, carrying them toward a future unwritten, neither of them spoke the words aloud. But they both knew. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not sacrifice, but choice.